My name is Julie Underwood, and I'm Dean here at the School of Education. I want to welcome all of you to this wonderful event celebrating the Year of the Wisconsin Idea. In my opinion, the Wisconsin Idea is actually what sets us apart from other universities, and actually, I think it is what sets us apart from even other land-grant institutions. Specifically, I'd like to welcome you to the School of Education, our lovely facility. We're celebrating the Year of the Wisconsin Idea as well. This year, we will celebrate in part by creating a Wisconsin Idea Engaged Scholarship Award. Actually, two of those awards. One will go to faculty and one will go to staff during our awards season in the spring. And it's something that we believe will highlight some of the wonderful work that faculty and staff in the School of Education do. So first I would like to introduce David Ward. Actually, so in this group it's like, okay, so the man who needs no introduction, right? Chancellor Ward returned to UW-Madison this summer, of course, after he had previously served in the position of chancellor from 1993 to 2000. His commitment to the Wisconsin Idea and his commitment to public service is well known. He also has a strong commitment to interdisciplinary work and innovation and change. During his chancellorship in the 1990s, he's known for the creation of the Cluster Hire Program, the university's Tech Transfer Council in 1995, and of course, the Mortgage Center for Public Service. In this round, he's already made some change or made a mark in his discussions about innovation and true change on our campus. Chancellor Ward has long been an advocate for engaged scholarship, and he brings that perspective from a national and campus-wide view today. So please join me in welcoming Chancellor David Ward as he shares his perspective on engaged scholarship.
Well, thank you, Julie. It's great to be back. I think I'm now approximately 11 weeks old. So it's great to be back. The one challenge, of course, is if you're in semi-retirement as a sort of consultant, you don't start this early in the day. So I'm going to have to warm up and get used to this again. First of all, let me thank everybody who's part of this celebration of the Wisconsin Idea. I think it's a great idea to use this year for this purpose. It's 100 years old. And there were a list of all the various entities on campus that were part and parcel of this conference. I want to thank all of you who are sort of coming together to try to create a cross-campus community dedicated to this idea of engagement. And I think what I hope, and this is the key to, I think, a change in both the rhetorical and the management style of higher education, is that when we sit down and talk, we really need action plans. I think that we've often been prone to the idea of imagining change, but very rarely acting on change. And I think that we're in a state in higher education where unless we actually act on our ideas in a sensible, forceful way of changing what we do, if we believe in that change, we really have to do that. I think for almost 50 years, in so many ways, change occurred almost organically, and often it had to wait around for new money or for a foundation to have an impulse behind it. Today, I think it's almost a form of self-help and of preservation, that unless we, from within ourselves, find the means to do this, even when there is no money there to do it, if we don't do it, nobody else will, and as the environment starts changing faster than we do, we have a challenge. And that's the sad message, I think, after being in retirement for 2 years, that I sort of give to you, is that change may be negotiable, but not to change in relation to some of our most creative ideas is probably not an option. And we do know that the fiscal environment is a pretty dreadful one in many respects, but yet we are a very large entity. We do have lots of things that we currently do that we probably never asked whether we should continue to do them or not. And so I think there is a debate or a dialogue we could have about priorities. because I think that's the only way we can probably move forward. It's not to continue to do what we already do and then add a few things on the top, but rather what should we have the highest priority in our commitments in going forward. I'm saying all this because I think engagement, even though for many people it's quite vague, is beginning to be sharpened as an idea, and it should be one of the informing values, and perhaps also those values may have an informing strategy that we can use as we move forward. I was on the Kellogg Commission, which was set up by what was then the Solgic, what is now the land-grant group. It was, I think, about 24 college presidents and I think 6 CEOs from major corporations. I felt that it was part of a whole variety of issues, including access, accountability, internationalization. There were 6 major themes, of which engagement was only one. In my judgment, the discussions in this one and the one on globalization or internationalization were among the best, because in some ways, the discussions of access and accountability were very retrospective and very, in a sense, well-worn trails. In these 2 areas, there was a sense that we didn't really have a coherent way in which we were doing it, particularly, and this is the big point in both of these, to ourselves. That is, that we were very big about saying internationalization was good or engagement was good, and it was good for others. So we were good for Africa, we were good for Asia, or we were good for charitable communities in our own community. But what was often missing is how did we need to change in order to, in a sense, do that. Engagement is truly reciprocal, and that at least was, I got that idea out of the discussions, whether the findings of the Kellogg Commission necessarily were as precise enough to inform where we should be going, and certainly not as precise enough as what you will be hearing later this morning. But at least I think it kick-started at the presidential level a discussion of what engagement was about, and had them reflect on how they needed to change, not only what they could do to help change in others, but what happened to us as we became and understood what engagement really was. In the end, I think what came out of that commission was an effort to try to restore an interest in our public mission during the stages in which we had become, in a fiscal sense, public-private partnerships. And that remains, to me, one of the great paradox, the great challenge for the public, and especially the public land grant, because we're all basically public-private partnerships now. Significant amount of our money is either from philanthropy or contracts of various kinds. Our out-of-state tuition is market-based, if not more. While there are certain ingredients of access that resemble the old public mission, what exactly we mean by a great national public land grant, all of us who are land grants need to say, well, then what are the properties? What are the outcomes that you would expect from that? And I noticed in our vision statement, we have such a statement to be a model public university in the 21st century. That word model, I think, needs a little bit more content as we move forward in the next year or two. I mean, the word model suggests something really dramatic, and yet as one looks through everything, it's not completely crystal clear how to define what model really means. I think that's the right way to go, but I think it means empirically we need a more precise definition of what that's about. It may also mean that in reaching out externally, we think of public service as more or less reaching out in the, quote, social sense. And I do think that probably the economic sense is almost as critical now. If you, as I've done in the last 2 or 3 weeks, try to get behind the political rhetoric down in the legislature, deep down it's actually jobs, 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 jobs. I mean, that's it. There's this fear of a recession that is leaving us with no jobs, and yet behind all that is a sense it's in the private sector, not in the public sector, that this will have to occur. So our engagement will, which I think we know how to do in a social sense, with not-for-profits and with what things that in a sense enhance our society. I think other kinds of outreach, the kind of outreach that we had in agriculture with dairy farms in the early part of this century, or our own tech transfer efforts in biotechnology and related medical areas, I think we're going to have to sort of wrap the outreach in a very comprehensive way in order, in a sense, to have some political impact, that what we're about is, in fact, a much more comprehensive sense of engaging our communities. And I think the other reason that we need to develop it is we've probably reached the limits of mass higher education. I came to this conclusion as president of ACE in my dealings with Congress. It was really that there was a fiscal and a quality limit, that once a country raises access of the 18 to 22-year-olds beyond about 55, 60%, it creates stress fiscally and in terms of accountability that we've not really reflected on. That is that then you start reaching in the normal curve of an 18-year-old performance, you start reaching levels of average or even slightly less than average performance and expecting them to do well in college. And if they don't do well, blame the school. But in fact, we're reaching so far into the class that you would expect a more customized response to the variability of the students who are arriving. In other words, customization rather than standardization would be the public-spirited way to approach that rather than a blame game or, you know, woe is me, this is a real problem. Mass higher education at some point was going to hit some quality limits. And this, obviously, the great success we have with low-income students is often low-income students who arrive at 22 having had a job or been in the military. Frequently, they are, in a sense, better prepared to survive in college than at 18. At 18, there is obviously variability. And the concept of remedial education, is remedial education odd? If you're in the bottom third of your high school class at 18, you would imagine that remedial education might be necessary. And so we've got a dialogue going on in terms of the quality of mass higher education, in which I think if we understood the community better and understood our public purpose better, we would in fact confront variability in students rather than standards in students. There are obviously minimum standards, and we all know what those might be. But above those minimum standards, there is a great deal of variability that requires a great deal of customization. And this was the only reason that I did not sign the Spellings Commission. The Spellings Commission was one size fits all, and at 18, damn it, there will be these standards, and if you fail, you fail. Tough. My position was that if you've got 65% of a population going on to college, it seems sensible that you would have some variable processes available. And we do. We have institutional variation of a level of no other country in the world. If you move from an elite private undergraduate college to a community college, we've got this great variability. So we're already responding, but then even within institutions, it seems to me we need to be more nuanced. And the second one is cost. When we thought of, in 1945 to 50, access to higher education, it was low cost or no cost. We really believed that we could take an entire generation and educate them to high quality at very little cost. And I think at the time, if you really read behind the brains of those people thinking about it, they probably, at the time it was probably 15, 20% access, they probably had in mind about a third of the population going on to college. My former country, in England, I went to college when 8% went on of the age group went on to college, and they thought doubling that would be difficult to get to around 20%. This was in the late 60s. So nobody at that time had any idea of 50, but the Brits are now at 52% of access at that age group, and we're significantly above that if you include community colleges. Nobody had any sense of the scale of what that would be. And if financial aid was ever going to be necessary, the scale of that financial aid, if you look at Pell Grants right now, nobody ever envisaged how much that would cost. So I think there are some cost issues that come from the scale that were never anticipated. And therefore, the debate about tuition and the proportion that should be paid for by individuals versus the state, that debate is all screwed up because there's still a middle-class belief in low tuition. But of course, low taxes and low tuition don't always go together. And so I think there are two areas which define environmentally the change. I think, and it really is this great ideal of 1945 to 55, this great ideal of mass access, high quality education, maybe a focused research mission, not necessarily across the board, but in a finite number of institutions, and others having perhaps a more segmented research mission. That we may have exhausted the vision and the actuality of that dream that came out of World War II. And we need to dream ourselves about what will the 21st century sort of look like. And I think this is why I think having this year, this pause of the Wisconsin idea, interests me a great deal because in a way it goes to a generation before World War II, the other great idealistic generation in higher education, the progressive era. The Wisconsin idea comes out of the ferment that created the phase on the character of the great research land-grant university, whether in land-grant or out of land-grant, the graduate school being adapted to the New England or English college, and a significant number of professional schools around them. In this room, you know all about that history, but that was the other period. And yet, even when they were doing that, just as in 1945, access was combined with quality as a deep value, here again was the idea of serving the public as at the same time as creating a great graduate school. So there was this ability to combine a search for quality, a search for performance, and yet at the same time make sure there was a democratic spirit underlining it. And both those phases of reform had it. We need to obviously inform in this somewhat desolate fiscal environment that we still are able to balance those two values. It's not clear that we can politically, but maybe outside of politics we can in effect create space where these two values can go together. And I think that the Wisconsin idea, you know, redefining it for the 21st century, connecting it with engaged scholarship, connecting it with the land-grant tradition, this long tradition of combining what one might call a democratic spirit and the drive to discover new knowledge, that the combination of those ideas is the root of this. We will have to adapt it, obviously, to meet the needs of the 21st century. And I think it could well be, when we look at the word engaged, it really becomes a central, not a segmented piece of what we do. And that may be the most important issue. In general, we've looked at public service, extension, continuing education as apart from the main mission. And the people in those segments of the institution often feel a little bit on the side. And it seems to be only by integrating these once peripheral activities into something that's seen to be the main focus, connected and interdependent with the main focus, will we get there. That will be an interesting challenge. Interestingly enough, I think in the biological sciences, and the medical sciences, it's happened naturally because of the immediacy of the results of their research. So much of their research has a certain immediacy, so that it is profoundly informative of biological theory, let's say stem cells, and yet immediately seems, maybe immediate, I mean 10 years, seems to have some immediacy in its effects on health. So welfare and the discovery of new knowledge there seem to be integrated in a way that epistemologically that doesn't talk about applied and pure and all those things. Many other areas perhaps we need to explore how that could be done. That's another of these kind of unities of trying to bring together the two areas. And I think that if it doesn't quite happen, then it's pretty important that those who are in a more traditional research function or research graduate teaching function need to be much more tolerant of alternative forms of scholarship. Scholarship is not one route, nor are all of us who may have doctoral degrees necessarily seeking to explore scholarship in the same way. It's the same way as at 18. We too will vary, and it will be important for us to think of a customized, nuanced activities in universities rather than a singular career path. Now, to some degree, this could be got by inter-institutional relationships. As I look, having returned to UW-Madison after almost 10 years away, the one positive thing that I've learned is inter-institutional linkages within the system far better than they were when I left. There was a certain amount of tension in those relationships. Linkages between UW-Milwaukee and UW-Madison, which are based on complementarities, not on wannabe activities. It's not Milwaukee wannabe Madison. Architecture, urban planning, public health are things that they do that we can piggyback on. Their engineering capacity relies a great deal on some of the bounds that they've developed with our School of Engineering. The whole effort to respond to a public demand for a different approach and a different magnitude in the professional development of nursing could not have been done by this campus alone. It really has taken a nuanced network. So it's not only within the campus that I think we need to understand parallel and linked pathways to scholarship, but we need to be a little bit more creative in seeing ourselves either as a nodal point or a key junction within a network, a nuanced network which allows us, in a sense, to have the Wisconsin idea to reach the state more effectively. The other campuses, in their own different way, can become an instrument with us of the Wisconsin idea, just as they may want to do some of this themselves. And therefore, I think this also raises questions about systems. We had a somewhat odd spring in the sense that our view of this might have been that secession is the right way to go. And it may be, it's one option, but you would still need to have a web of linkages, whether you were independent or not. The important thing is, how can you meet multiple needs either within your institution through some sort of customized, nuanced definition of the mission, but that will never be enough. In the 21st century, it will be a network of institutions, not necessarily peer institutions, sometimes institutions with a somewhat different mission that will define your engagement and help you with that engagement. So what I hope is that UW-Madison is actually reasonably well positioned ideologically, because the Wisconsin idea was our idea. I actually think it's a pretty universal idea, but it is 100 years old, which means it needs refreshing a great deal. It can't just stand for itself, just like the word model public land-grant university. The word model needs much more definition. But I think we can move there and think about what in the 21st century this will be. Now, I'm not an expert on engagement. We've got people here who know more about it than I do. But what I do sincerely believe is the dialogue about engagement, just like the dialogue about continuing education. I think the dialogues going around those two will be very informative of how we refocus our mission to be a, quote, model public university. So I look forward to the dialogue that's being generated today. And above all, let's all be modest enough to remember that as we pursue engagement with the thought of enriching others, deep down, it needs to enrich us first. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, David, for starting us out on that path of reflection. I'd next like to introduce Nancy Matthews. Nancy is a professor of environmental studies at the Nelson Institute. She's also director of the Morgridge Center for Public Service and co-chair of the Biological Sciences Divisional Tenure Committee. In addition, she was the lead for our accreditation project a couple years ago, which really involved a lot of work on our campus and really recommitted ourselves in many ways to the Wisconsin idea. So in all of those roles, Nancy has a keen interest in engaged scholarship, and I'll ask Nancy to come up and introduce our invited guests.
Good. Thank you very much, Julie. Well, this is an exciting moment, I think, for our campus and for the entire year of the Wisconsin Idea, and we're very, very lucky to have Chancellor Ward return to our campus to energize us to rethink what a model university looks like and to really start this discussion off, which I hope will be a year-long conversation about engaged scholarship. It's my privilege today to introduce Burt Bargerstock and Hiram Fitzgerald as our guests for the next 3 days, or 2 days, I guess, from hereafter. Burt Bargerstock is the co-director of the National Collaboration for the Study of University Engagement and director of Communication Information Technology in the Office of the Associate Provost for University Outreach and Engagement at Michigan State University. His work focuses on institutional research and community-engaged scholarship and the utilization of information technology to support and enhance collaborations between the academy and society. He leads the Outreach and Engagement Measurement Instrument Project and is the associate editor for the forthcoming Transformations in Higher Education, the Scholarship of Engagement book series. He's the former chair of the University Continuing Education Association's Outreach and Engagement Community of Practice and participates in the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities, National Outreach Scholarship Conference, Association for Continuing Higher Education, EDUCAUSE. He earned his BA in Political Theory and his MS in College and University Administration from Michigan State and has completed his coursework for his PhD in Higher Education at Michigan State. Hiram Fitzgerald is the University Distinguished Professor of Psychology and Associate Provost for University Outreach and Engagement at Michigan State University and the President of the National Outreach Scholarship Conference Board. He's also the co-chair of the Michigan MSU Family Research Initiative, Executive Director of the World Association for Infant Mental Health, and member of the Council on Outreach Engagement for the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities. Hiram is the co-director of the Michigan Longitudinal Study of the Family Risk for Alcoholism over the life course for 25 years, and is the principal investigator of the Michigan local site component of the 17-site national evaluation of early Head Start. His major areas of research include the study of infant and family development in community contexts, the impacts of fathers on early childhood development, implementation of systematic models of organizational process and change, and the etiology of alcoholism, and broad issues related to scholarship and engagement. Hiram holds his PhD in experimental child psychology from the University of Denver. Thank you so much both for being here.
Thank you. Chancellor Ward, I think you know a hell of a lot about engagement. Very impressive comments. This is actually a very special delight for me to be here today because two of my very dearest friends from undergraduate school a long time ago are Jean and Mert Stambach, and they produced Amy Stambach, who was right back there on your faculty. So it's first chance I had to meet Amy, and it's just been wonderful. All right, we're going to go through a lot of stuff in a half an hour, and it's mostly to try to demonstrate or illustrate the extent to which the engagement scholarship movement is spreading throughout higher education in the United States across all disciplines. We could pick a starting point. I was going to pick the Wisconsin idea, but then I thought, well, you know more about the Wisconsin idea, but Catherine has been sending me so much stuff now to read about the Wisconsin idea. I know a lot more about it now than I did a few days ago. But Ernie Boyer, when he was at the Carnegie Foundation, lots of people sort of anchor some of these changes in the way he characterized what higher education faculty ought to be attending to. And instead of just teaching research and service, framed it in the form of scholarship. Scholarship of discovery, which some people think about as basic research. From my perspective, scholarship of discovery is also part of applied research because you're discovering new things about your attempts to apply something. Scholarship of integration, scholarship of application, and scholarship of teaching. Kellogg Commission, which Chancellor mentioned, had a 7-part test of engagement, responsiveness, see a green pointer? I need to be appropriate here. Whoops, it's supposed to go red. It's not working. No, okay, responsiveness, respect for partners, academic neutrality, accessibility, integration, coordination. So there's a lot of thought put in and set out a set of criteria to think about what engagement actually meant. Campus Compact in 1985, a little bit before the Kellogg Commission, talked about the civic purposes and focused a lot of attention on service learning and civic engagement as the frame for engagement at that time. Truckin is a group of about 30 research universities that has been supported by Campus Compact in its 21st century iteration. And they meet annually and talk about the scholarship of service learning and civic engagement. So there's a focus on learning in student learning. Volunteerism is not the agenda. Students having transformational experiences about their life at the institution, working in communities, matching what's going on in communities with the disciplinary knowledge that they're exposed to, and self-reflecting on their role in society is the scholarship of engagement. And that's, Truckin focuses a lot of that. New England Resource Center for Higher Education at UMass Boston, headed up now by John Saltmarsh, gives out an annual award and a set of recognitions based on the work of Ernest Linton. They also now do the Carnegie Foundation evaluations of engaged universities and institutions. So, 2003, I think, when Luana Simon was the chair of the Provost Committee of the Committee on Institutional Cooperation, otherwise known as the Big 10 or the Big 13 or whatever we are at the moment, I asked Luana, who is running the Committee on Engagement for the CIC? And she said there was none. So I applied to the CIC to do that, and since my provost was the chair of that group, it got approved. And so we formed that group. Who had an idea of what outreach at that time, the word was outreach, was? So we found 3 definitions that pre-existed that committee. In 1993, we defined it as generating, transmitting, applying, preserving knowledge for the direct benefit of external audiences that are consistent with the university and unit missions. So it's anchored in the disciplinary frame of the university. University of Wisconsin-Madison Council on Outreach. Did you know you had one of those? Okay. Involves creation, integration, transfer, and application of knowledge for the direct benefit of external audiences. Sounds pretty similar. Ohio State University, Bobby Moser was headed up that unit at the university, at the Ohio State University at that time. Engage with the community, however the community is defined. Define problems jointly, set common goals and agendas, develop measures of success together, and leverage university, public, and private resources to achieve whatever the common outcome. So we came up with the definition in 2 years. That's Peyton Smith from here. Engagement is a partnership of university knowledge and resources with those of the private public sectors. And notice the very first thing, that enrich scholarship and research. We're universities, and that's what we do. We are a community of scholars. We enhance curricular content and process because we're educating the next generation of scholars. Preparing citizen scholars, we want our students to really be have a deeper and different understanding than perhaps they've had in the past of what it means to be a citizen in a democracy. Endorse democratic values and civic responsibility, address critical societal issues, and contribute to the public good. Carnegie Foundation then pulled together 14 institutions of higher education, from community colleges to research universities. Penn, Michigan State, Minnesota, and Denver were the 4 sort of research universities. I was a member of this group, and it was the dean of the College of Education at the University of Denver who at one meeting during when we were out in San Francisco said, well, you know, the CIC has this definition. Why don't we start with theirs? And we did. It got morphed a little bit, but it's collaboration between institutions of higher education and larger communities for the mutual beneficial exchange of knowledge and resources, so it sounds similar. So there's a whole lot of folks in many different places across about a 10-year period of time who all are sort of thinking the same thing about what is engaged scholarship. Here are the CIC institutions who are currently have full classification as engaged institutions within the Carnegie Foundation. Iowa is about to get it, and so most of our Big 10 schools have that classification. APLU, Association of Public Land-Grant Universities, the old nostalgic, Council on Engagement and Outreach, engagement, extended education, public and government relations, regional and economic development. It's a pretty inclusive definition of what we do at our institutions, sort of the breadth that the Chancellor mentioned in his comments. We are, I chair a committee of these folks. We have a almost final draft of a white paper to submit to the presidents and provosts of APLU that will go to them in March for approval. That will be a paper on the centrality of engagement in higher education across the mission. The CIC and we invited At that time, this is the modern name, the Council on Engagement Outreach of APLU, had a different name then, to join us to try to develop not just a definition of engagement, but a set of benchmarks about engagement. What are the metrics that would, across institutions, reflect what it is that we do around this engagement scholarship agenda? So we had 7 categories. Within each of those 7 categories, there are about 5 choices that people could think about at their own institutions. Evidence of institutional commitment to engagement. If you don't have a chancellor or a president that can stand up in front of you and articulate what your chancellor just did or what my president does, you can forget it. It can't evolve at any institution top down, because faculties, as you well know, have a lot to do with what happens in higher education, especially research universities. But if you don't have executive leadership saying, this is a value of this institution, and I want to see how that's carried out at all levels of the institution, middle management deans, chairs, faculty, they all have to be on the same agenda, and it has to have very clear higher administration leadership. Evidence, and that's the first criteria for the Carnegie Foundation. Evidence of institutional resource commitments to engagement. You can say, yeah, we're going to do that. There are no resources for it, but we're going to do that. That's sort of like you mandate all these things, but don't fund them. Evidence that students are involved in engagement outreach activities. Evidence that faculty and staff are engaged. Evidence that institutions are engaged. Evidence of resource revenue opportunities generated through engagement, and evidence of assessing the impact and outcomes. When we get, over the course of the days, to real discussion about metrics that Bert's going to lead, you'll see at least a bunch of more deep set of examples of how this is playing out at the metric side and the measurement side across the country. And then we will also, Bert will also show you sort of what we're doing at MSU through institutional mechanisms in order to generate those kind of reports. Across all this, there are 4 critical aspects of engagement scholarship. The first of which, it must be scholarly. I tell my social and behavioral science friends, you know, we have lots of theories in psychology and anthropology and sociology, and especially in psychology, that have been generated over 50 years of intense research on college freshmen. What does that tell us about anything? Why don't you take some of these theories in these really well-controlled studies on conflict resolution and go out where the conflicts are and see how your models test out? Then change them and go back to the lab. Go back to the context where human beings actually live and interact and learn more about your models and your concepts and your theories, and go back and have this constant flow cutting across the mission. Teaching, research, and service. Engaged research and research. Engaged teaching and teaching. Engaged service and service. Must be reciprocal and mutually beneficial. This is a foundational idea. If I want to work in Detroit in order to enhance the educational school system in Detroit, and I don't talk to the people in Detroit and have them part of that process, I will fail. Okay? Especially if you're from Michigan State University, a predominantly white institution in Detroit, which is 94% African American. If they're not involved in the conversation, if they're not involved in helping to develop the kinds of models and theories and research projects that we want to really test, there are tons of schools there to do everything from randomization of classrooms. But if they're not a part of that discussion, and if there isn't transfer of knowledge as a result of being part of that process, we will fail. Okay? There's no guarantee we'll succeed even with that, but we surely will fail if we're not involved with that conversation. And it must embrace the processes of values of civil democracy, because that's what our country is based on. We trained 12 new colleagues from King Faisal University this summer at Michigan State, and we'll be there in March. And so we didn't change any of our slides. We talked about civil democracies and everything because that's what all our concepts are based on. And they chose to come over and get trained by us, so we stuck to it. We don't know. Transformative Regional Engagement, TRE Networks, is another group that's come up. TRE networks are really focused on mid-urban rural areas and how we can enhance economic development within that mid-rural sort of area and regional. So Vic Lechtenberg at Purdue is the current president of that group. It was really started by Tim Franklin when he was at Virginia Tech and now at Penn State. Innovate in ways that support regional development. Urban Serving University, started by former president of University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, Nancy Zimpher, now at SUNY New York, to leverage intellectual capital and economic power in a global economy, human capital, workforce, revitalize neighborhoods, economic development, reduce health disparities, etc. There are about 6 or 7 cities in the United States now where the Urban Serving University initiative is being tested out. And Nancy continues to develop that now in a partnership with APLU. International Association for Research on Service Learning and Community Engagement. This is an individual organizational membership group. Headed up, I don't know who actually heads it up now, but Andy Furco, who's now at Minnesota, but used to be at Berkeley, is deeply involved with it. And it really focuses on the scholarship of service learning and civic engagement. Imagining America, housed at Syracuse, where Nancy Cantor, a social psychologist, is president, and appears in the Chronicles of Higher Education and recently. Nancy is a friend of mine from way back when she was a professor at University of Michigan. To integrate community and academic knowledge to solve significant community, identify real-world problems, advance problem-solving research, teaching, and learning. It's all the same sorts of things that are coming up. This focusing on arts, humanities, and design. And they have actually developed a document on P&T related to their agenda. Community Campus Partnerships for Health, headed up by Serena Seifer. Used to be at the University of Washington, now at Guelph. Authentic partnerships, supporting communities, recognizing rewarded faculty for community engagement. A lot of that translational science that's coming out of medicine and public health. University Professional and Continuing Education Association, this is really Bert's group. What is the role of scholarship? How do you measure it? How do you prepare faculty and staff to engage in it? CEOs for Cities, it has a new president whose name I don't know. But Carol Coletta was the leader, the CEO of that group for a long time. Works with network partners. This is sort of coming from the community side, trying to bring business and entrepreneurs and innovation to the university and also to government. So it's universities, government, and the business industry coming together to basically figure out how they could transform urban environments. Federal funding agencies. You do NSF or NIH, both of which I am involved with, you have to indicate what benefit does this have for society, and how would you measure that? And if you disseminate information, what difference does it make? Okay? If you go to extension, and I don't want to get into evolving arguments about extension, but extension over a long period of time developed a really solid, heavy system of sending information out from the university and saying, here's what you need to know, do it. All based on good research. It's an expert model, but never, but too infrequently did they say, once we disseminate it, what difference did it make? Did people know how to use it, or did they just read the little brochure and then say, oh, how do I do that? So there was no scholarship connected with the dissemination process. So even dissemination ought to be scholarly focused. What's the evidence that what you disseminated actually worked? Do you really take those pills? If not, why not? Okay? That's a perfectly valid, good question having to do with scholarship and research designs, et cetera. So we have a whole bunch of journals now that popped up, but the work you do as an engaged scholar ought to be at the level to be publishable in any journal. If you're doing good community engagement, you should be able to publish in the American Journal of Community Psychology, their Tier 1 journal. If you're doing Journal of Public Health, whatever that journal and whatever that disciplinary set of journals are, if you're doing it in a scholarly way, you ought to be able to have some of that work get into the top level journals of your field. There are lots of other journals, including all these, that will publish other aspects of engaged scholarship. You know, you may have learned a lot, like we have learned in the 6 years I've been working with the tribal communities in Michigan. We learned a lot about how you build a partnership with the Intertribal Council of Michigan and their early childhood programs. And we have published that process information because we keep a lot of narratives. I read your book. We keep a lot of narratives about that engagement process. We had 3-hour videotapes of the tribal elders and storytellers. That's informing us of what we need to know in order to get them to the point where they'll accept a randomized classroom design. Because they now understand that they can only get their questions answered by that kind of rigor of methodology. But there's always a qualitative piece in it, because stories are important to understanding that. Transformations Higher Education Scholarship Engagement book series that Burton's involved with, and we've published a bunch of little books so far. We have one in press. We have about 2 more that are getting ready to be submitted. So that's sort of moving along. The Academy of Community Engagement Scholars. This is Jim Zeisig and Pat Sobrero at North Carolina State University. Sort of drew together about 30 folks around the country. And we've been meeting for about 2 years. We're about to shift the organizing aspect of this to a different group that you'll see in a minute. Academy of Engineers, Academy of Education, National Academy of Sciences. Why shouldn't we have an Academy of Engaged Scholars? Elected because of the work they do, assembled in order to generate the kinds of things that national academies do apropos of the domain of their influence. So this is in development. We have probably about another 1.5 years of work to do on it. The National Outreach Scholarship Conference is now the Engagement Scholarship Consortium. Greg is a represent University of Wisconsin extension on that. Founded in 2001. It's gone morphed through a number of changes. In 2007, we became a member of it. And between 2007, Craig Wiedemann at Penn State and I engineered breaking it away from the Association of Public Land Grant Universities into an independent 501c3 so that we could be inclusive of all kinds of institutions in higher education. These are the members, and we are now now that we've changed the name to this, we're aggressively recruiting new members. So this is the Engagement Scholarship Consortium. These are the members: Alabama, Alberta, University of Alberta, Auburn, down the list. We focus on professional development. You can see that there are all kinds of networks involved. This color is really the engagement outreach, the Engagement Scholarship Consortium. These are all partnerships. Virginia Tech in the summer runs an engagement academy that targets executive management. Provosts, deans, folks like that, vice presidents, presidents, for an intensive week of training on what that means at that level for engagement. University of Kentucky and the University of New Hampshire have faculty development programs. They actually call them academies. University of Wisconsin led leadership through Catherine Loving and her colleagues. They now meet with our annual meeting of the Engagement Scholarship Consortium. All these kinds of partners here, from the Hall of Fame, Sloan Leadership, National Review Board. That's a board that will review the dossiers or portfolios of people preparing for tenure who really want to have engagement represented well in their materials. They'll review it and provide feedback to that faculty person about the quality of that representation. Book and monograph series, they're the journals. We do the regional Kellogg McGraw Awards. We do the evaluation and the selection process for the 4 regional winners, and then those winners go to the APLU for their awarding of the national winner. The Engagement Scholarship Emergent Scholars, this is a pre-conference event that runs about 20 to 25 graduate students or young faculty, or new faculty. And that's it's about a day-and-a-half intensive training program that, again, is precedes the Engagement Scholarship Consortium. We've now become the sort of the home for about 2 years. We've committed to help the Academy of Community Engagement Scholarship to develop its final documents and then to become an independent organization, again, a 501c3, and then they can proceed as they will. And we have the annual meeting of the Engagement Scholarship Consortium. So this network, initiatives, and partners are what the Engagement Scholarship Consortium is trying to develop. So all those other groups, the TRE networks, Campus Compact, CEOs for Cities, all those integrated electronically into the Engagement Scholarship Consortium. And then we hope this to grow to 100 institutions within the next 2 years. And this is an institutional membership organization. Setting the standard, providing our own studies across, you can see these are all research universities, across research universities and the other institutions that might come in to really put some teeth and action and recommendations into promotion and tenure, definition of engagement scholarship, implementation of engagement scholarship across the mission, and anything else that group might come up with. So that's what's happening in the country in higher education, at least some of it. So I think we have...
Thank you, Hi. I think this was a phenomenal representation of the rapid increase in growth in the interest in engaged scholarship, the fact that this is something that is being recognized more intensively in terms of the research universities and the true reciprocity that is involved as we move forward and reevaluating what we mean by engaged scholarship, the redefinition of outreach and engagement. I think this is all part of the conversation that we as a campus are beginning to have. And I thank Julie for bringing up the reaccreditation ideas, because we had 6 theme teams that talked about what we needed to look at and be concerned about and focus on as we redefined ourselves for the next 10 years during our reaccreditation process. Every single one of those 6 teams focused on the fact that we need to rethink our public mission. And I think that was really the foundation leading into the declaration of the year of the Wisconsin Idea. And what Chancellor Ward had really focused on is that this is a perfect time for us to redefine, update, and rethink what our mission is. It coincides with the 150th of the Morrow Act, that was a perfect timing as well. So I think that this is a charge for our campus. I see a lot of energy around it, and I am so excited to see what's happening in the field of higher education all across the country that really is going to re-energize this effort on campus. What I'd like to do is just spend a couple of minutes here. You have cards on your table, and we're just going to take a couple of minutes to have you think of your questions, concerns, comments. You may want to write down some thoughts about what you think we do well, what you think our challenges are moving forward, and then after this few minutes we're going to have you, well, we'll want you to leave those cards on the tables. We're using them later in our meetings. And then we'll open it up for discussion, comments, and questions of both Burton High. So please take just a few minutes here to write down your thoughts, questions, concerns, then I'll reconvene us in just a second here. Okay, so I'd like to just open it up and have you ask questions and share perspectives with both High and Burt.
Let me just make a comment while you're coming up with that first question. We actually have 5 PowerPoints. The way the visit has been structured, it's not clear that we can actually do those in the different things, but they will all stay here with Nancy or whoever's, they'll be here. One is on aligning higher education for engagement scholarship, economic development and engagement scholarship, community partners and engagement scholarship, aligning research-intensive university with engagement mission measures and metrics that Bert's actually going to talk a lot about this afternoon, and then the one that you just saw. So they'll be here and available to you if they're useful at all. So yes.
So my question is the big question is probably the obvious question, but I'm pretty good at asking obvious questions. Even though we at the University of Wisconsin have been at the heart of this kind of movement for a very long time with the Wisconsin idea and our membership in a number of the organizations and initiatives that you put up on your slideshow, there's still a huge cultural leap that would need to be made before this concept was fully embraced within our organization, within our incentive programs, within our tenure process. Can you give us some idea of how other institutions who are similarly situated have dealt with that cultural change? Or if they have, maybe they haven't. Maybe they're just like we are.
They're probably somewhere in between, kind of where we are and where you are. And we have faculty on our campus who we actually hired not to do this kind of work. And so when we talk about an engaged institution, at least from our place, and I think the conversation around most of the members of the Engagement Scholarship Consortium, it's the focus on scholarship that's redefining outreach. Okay? So some of my colleagues, as Greg experienced several months ago, like Lou Swanson at Colorado State University, is adamant about abolishing the word outreach from higher education. I mean, he just is, because of its view by most of the faculties that service, as opposed to engaged scholarship, where if I am really interested in working in communities driven by my disciplinary questions and theories, I should be able to succeed in my institution the way anybody else does, and my work should be just as valued. Because what do we ask faculty to do? We ask faculty to try to get external support. You know, it's the funding rates at NIH and everything, you know, but so it's a very, very competitive process. And so we want the effort made. Hopefully we'll hit you know, a fair share of those. We want them to publish work in the places where their peers value, and in other places. Okay? Not everybody can publish every single article that in their career, for example, in my field, in psychological bulletin. You know, you might get 1 or 2 in your career. But we want them to publish in the kinds of journals that have today's impact factors and stuff. But there are lots of other things that are scholarly that can be published and are important to people. And so we want sort of those things to be communicated as well. Scholarly also moves us away from, especially research universities, definition of research as equivalent to science. We have a lot of faculty who are not scientists, who do incredibly good scholarly work in the arts, in the humanities, in some of the social and behavioral sciences that we've all called sciences because we have to do what the physicists and the biologists, and so we have, you know, psychological science now. It used to be just psychology, but now it's psychological science. We've just fallen into that kind of trap of defining what criteria are used to evaluate. I read through the one promotion and tenure document that you gave me last night, and it's pretty traditional. It's research and it's science. Now I know you have 4 such documents, so I've only seen and it looks pretty traditional, but I thought, boy, well, nobody, if that was your whole university definition of what qualifies you to be promoted, you would have nobody here except natural scientists. So I know you have diversity here in the way, but I haven't seen the other documents. But if you look at, you know, as I interact, much of my research is multidisciplinary. Like the etiology of alcoholism takes me into genetics and to fMRI scanning, but also into social and behavioral science kinds of stuff. So, and these folks just have different ideas about what scholarly work is. Okay? So it's broadening that definition, it's providing a conversation across the university that we are a community of scholars, that there are opportunities, as we've developed at MSU, to bring arts and humanities and engineering together. We've connected and helped people in our College of Arts and Letters understand that they really can get external funding if they really link into all the exciting stuff going on in digital media and into engineering and computer science, and we have all these kind of new partnerships developing. But we have, as a university, said to my office, go out and do this. Help this faculty sort of begin to transform and change the way that the disciplines come together and work together. So getting more commerce across disciplines, getting more inter-university. We have a research charter. I don't think you do in Wisconsin, right? Well, it's sort of like the Triangle in North Carolina. We have the University of Michigan, Michigan State University, Wayne State University.
We're our own triangle.
Yeah. Right. So you now have an opportunity to sort of build that kind of consortium across maybe just the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee. I don't know the diversity of your institutions here. But even if you did that, even if the two of you began to say, you know, we're aggregating some information about our impact on the state of Wisconsin across research grants. I know because one of my colleagues in the Early Head Start is Rachel Schiffman. She's Associate Dean for Research of Nursing at University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee now. And she keeps telling me about all these grants they're getting. So I know they're a pretty good research outfit in that part of that university. Don't know the rest of the university. Nancy Zipfer came from there. Stephen Percy runs a really great political science community engagement program there. So I know there are some really quality folks there who have really great programs and stuff. So to begin to aggregate and build those relationships between those two, you know, provides a different sense of what's going on to the state. So probably talking all around your question, but we also developed, in addition to the definition at Michigan State University, a set of criteria for promotion and tenure called points of distinction that we have some copies of, and we'll leave here, and we'll talk about them in one of our sessions. And that document basically said, you know, yeah, give us your list of publications, your external grants, and your teaching. And then tell us what difference it makes. We now have that in most of our institutions, including the biology tenure thing, where you have to write a little 2-page statement about your research and things like that. We want to know what is the context within which you do your scholarship? What significance has it had? What impact has it had? You know, just to be frank with you, we, faculty, have created this tier system. Nobody else created it. And so we now have this elitist sort of set of criteria within our disciplines. And if I publish an article in Journal A, Tier 1, and 6 people read it, and if I publish an article in a Tier 3 journal and 400 people read it, what's the bigger impact? I don't know the answer to that, but it's a question. The Journal of Higher Education Outreach and Engagement went this year to an online free status. That journal, 4 of us have joined in the editorial board of that journal to sort of bring it up to increase its standards. We've been working on that for about 2 years. It was a subscription journal, and hardly anybody was subscribing to it. So, which means hardly anybody's reading it. So January to June, 70,000 downloads of articles published in that journal. That's pretty amazing, because they're downloads, they're not just hits. So all of a sudden, that information is out there. You know, if it's 70,000 downloads, probably they share it with one other person. That's 140,000 people that read articles from that. So is that a good measure of impact? I don't know. That's a heck of a lot better than 128 subscriptions, which is what they had. So, so all of a sudden, the University of Georgia, which publishes that journal, is like, this is cool. This is great. This is worth our investment in that journal. And now, with the 4 of us as associate editors, with a peer review process in place, upgrading the quality of those articles across all the different methodologies, all the different approaches, all the different ways that that journal, people who submit to that journal do, we can begin now to really assess impact in a different kind of way. Then that has to go into the PMT process somewhere along the way. So we're not saying that we, at Michigan State University, would not say ever, engagement is something else we do. We say engaged research, engaged teaching, and engaged service is as foundational to our mission as is teaching, research, and service. Because we use the same criteria to assess them. Do you try to get money? Do you publish your findings? And do you do service? But engaged service. Okay? We want evidence that if you provide a service to a community, it made a difference. Community goes all the way down to a little valuation. I give a talk here. We should practice what we preach. Well, what the hell? So we should have handed out a form for you guys and said, was it meaningful? Did it provide the information you thought you were going to get? Was it presented well? And we get that feedback. We do that in all of our conferences now. You know, you get a little form at the end of the thing. Please fill out the... That provides evidence that we were on target. We had something meaningful to say to the community, to the group we were talking to, or we were off base. Off base in that context is, do not resubmit this article to this journal again. You know, it's a reject. Everything we do as scholars ought to be evidence-based. And then that evidence ought to be part of our evaluation as employees at whatever institution we're at. Every institution can figure out that set of emphases they want to give. Every discipline can decide what those things ought to look like. But it all be part of the conversation. Especially with young faculty. I don't know about your young faculty, but the young faculty we have coming into Michigan State University across a great many disciplines are not really interested in staying in their little offices. They're really interested in doing their work out in communities. We have all of our new hires in recent years in sociology have been public sociologists. The American Anthropological Association just had a new public anthropology sort of a thing. And psychology has a public psychology definition and all those kind of things. It's, if we are the harbingers of knowledge in this society, it ought to make a difference for our society. Our schools are crumbling, our urban areas are crumbling. What are we doing about it? We knowledge keepers. We ought to take our knowledge and merge it with other people's knowledge, put it together and solve these problems in ways that we can succeed as scholars and they can succeed as community holders of the knowledge that they need to implement and sustain. So it's all those things that go together, and this is a really roundabout preaching to your question.
Yes, because I understand that piece. The heart of it, though, is cultural change. Because as we know, culture will eat process or planning.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you one example of cultural change. The way that my leader did it at Michigan State University. She was our provost for 11 years, and she began to craft this change then. Then she became president. In the last, and then we hired Kim Wilcoxon as our provost from Kansas. During Kim's tenure, which is now headed into its 6th year, 13 of our deans are new. All 17 of our deans are on board. I mean, if you're talking about the practical realities of how you transform an organization, you transform the management of that organization to be consistent with the mission of the institution. So you align the institution to its mission. And folks who are not folks who are the managers of that organization, called deans and chairs, administrators, if they're not on board, they all serve at will. And you change the institution to fit its mission.
I think that the piece that I would add to it, because all this is very true, we've had some advantages in terms of that long period of leadership from Luanna Simon, the contribution she's made to any number of projects and efforts around this. I should also add the challenges she's issued to us. I mean, you have to really, she's tough, and you really have to be able to show results on things. But the other piece of it that is not at the executive level is the culture that operates at the level of faculty and staff and folks that are on campus, the sense they make of the environment they're in. I think the promotion and tenure process is an expression of that. And in our campus, we've taken steps to align that process, certainly with the rhetoric and the intention of some of these documents, the points of distinction and things like that. But in addition to that, it's the piece that Hy said very early on and quickly, and that's how we communicate these things. In a lot of ways, it's communicating again and again and again, and it's communicating over a long period of time. We spend, and I'll talk more about this later, but spend an enormous amount of time trying to find and document examples of folks who are doing really amazing engagement as we would define it. Things we would say meet the highest standards of scholarship and at the same time are heavily involved with communities in terms of reciprocity, mutuality, building research projects together or teaching projects together. We find them in places that are out of the way. We find them in psychology, to be sure. But we're always on the make for things in chemistry. We're always looking for things that are coming out of physics and stuff like that as well. Because what we know is that there are faculty who are very drawn to this sort of thing, don't have the first idea of what it would look like. I mean, I think that part of the meaning-making issue here is, can you at least hold up examples of what something might look like if they wish to emulate it? I think it's true that what we hear a lot from our faculty is that a lot of them are interested in doing this sort of thing, but some of them really don't see the connection, how it would work. Or how do you put together enough faculty on campus who are across several different fields to pull together around a large multidisciplinary project where they're going to do a piece of it. So we're forever trying to find those kinds of stories and tell them. We also celebrate those things. One of the things you had mentioned earlier was the awards that award program that you're initiating this year, which I really applaud you for, by the way. I think that's a tremendously important thing. One of the things that, and we struggled with it, we have an awards program that's now in the 7th year on our campus. We struggled for a long time about whether to have an award specifically in Engaged Scholarship versus all of the other awards, and figuring out how many of those other awards are people being awarded for things that are engaged. And we went back and forth on this. And we still track that. But in terms of our, one thing I would encourage you to think about is one thing, our Outreach Scholarship Community Partnership Award, when it's given, we give one of them a year, and it's to a faculty member or an academic staff member whose appointment is in research specifically. And the award is jointly given to that person and their partner. And the cash award that goes with it is split equally. And what we do to say that this is important is not only do we convene the process across campus, we hold it to the same standards. So when we name distinguished professors on our campus, which is sort of the high-level titling thing that we do on our campus with faculty members, there's a whole process that you have to put in place as to who's represented on the selection committee. We hold ourselves to that same standard in replicating those sorts of standards around this award. And that award is conferred at the same time that the highest level awards in the university are given. So I think part of it is, to be cliche, talking the walk, and part of it is talking that over and over again and over a long period of time. And I'm really convinced these things, I think it's absolutely right that culture eats initiative. But if all you have is initiative, and it's only sporadic, I mean, we know there are a lot of institutions, not yours or mine, where you'll get a president who will come in and their intention is to be there for 4 years or 5 years or whatever and move on. I mean, the research in higher ed suggests presidents don't stick around long. If that's the goal, they're going to come in with here's my 5 points or my 4 points, and these are our big issues, and then they move on. The faculty are here for life. They're seeing these things sort of come in and go out. Yeah, some of them. So what are you saying over the very long haul? Who are the people in place for a long period of time? And I think who you appoint as deans, who the people are who are heading departments matter. I think how you communicate it matters. I think how you reward it and express that matter. And I think that's what works over culture change. Culture change happens through those sorts of things, and they happen through talking over coffee. And God, we do a lot of that. We have a lot of meetings across our campus where it's just talking and working through problems with folks.
Prior to being associate provost, I was director of an interdisciplinary graduate program in applied developmental science at MSU. I had 20 units on campus participating in that. It was totally run off of self-money for a decade. And then the office I hold was redefined and by Luana Simon and into basically applied developmental science, although we don't call it that anymore. We call it engaged scholarship. And so I already had about 160 faculty across the campus who were doing community-based research of some kind or another, scholarship. And so that was my pool to start with. And so the first year that I was in the current office, that's the group that I expanded. So I suspect, and I didn't go to the Council of Deans to talk about this new outreach and engagement orientation for a year, because I wanted to have in my hip pocket one of their stellar faculty from each college, so that when I presented what we were trying to do with engaged scholarship and how we were going to move it from the old outreach and continuing education. The office I have now used to be continuing ed. And any dean that would challenge me, I had a person in their college who I knew they valued highly, who was doing exactly the kind of work we were talking about. And all of a sudden, they understood how we were defining it and what the criteria were and all those. And so, you know, I bet that if you were to survey the faculty of this university, you would find an enormous number of faculty who are doing work off of this campus somewhere. Now, the extent to which when they do that work off this campus, they actually engage the community in a meaningful, you know, reciprocal kind of dialogue and planning process and everything, that may not be there yet. But there's going to be an enormous number of folks. I know we have a joint, we have a partnership with you on water, Michigan State and University of Wisconsin, and there's does anybody know what the other institution is? I think there's a third one. It's what, $140 million? Yeah, it could be. Yeah, I don't know. So I bet you could already, you know, have a core of 300 or 400 faculty or more perhaps, who are. We have 2,800 faculty out of 4,500 possible, who are in our database now who do engage scholarship. 2,800. I'll bet you our legislature doesn't know that. So March 1, I approached all the 15 provosts of the 15 four-year institutions in Michigan. And we don't have a system. We have a thing called the Council of Presidents. And they've gotten behind it. So March 1, across 5 core areas: talent development, K through 12 education, early childhood, economic development, and community development. We will have 3 representatives from each of those institutions in each of those 5 areas, selected because of their highly recognized community engagement, in the state capitol with poster sessions, speakers, etc., with their community partners. And each community partner will contact his or her legislator and say, I'm going to be in Lansing on March the 1st with my partner from Michigan Tech, and we're going to be talking about the work we've been doing to develop whatever they're developing in the Upper Peninsula. It would be great if you stopped over. So 15 times 5 times 3, we're going to have a heck of a lot of people down there right in the state capitol with poster sessions right in the wings, occupying the speakers' rooms, etc., telling our state legislature, showing our state legislature, this is what higher education is doing to transform the state of Michigan through scholarship, through community partnerships. And that's why you should be supporting us. Will it make any difference? I don't know. But it means that I like your chancellor. We're doing it. We're on an action agenda. We're fighting back. And we're doing it through engaged scholarship. And I think that's one of the appeals of this moving away from the notion of outreach, just sending out stuff and providing services stuff, to real transformational change. We have a new $1 million grant from the EDA for regional economic development through our one division that reports to me, that has 5 other faculty departments part of that project. It's time for us to take our knowledge and apply it in ways that are discovery-based. End of speech.
Okay, I saw there were a couple other questions, and I'm going to have to hold off on those. But I want to make everybody aware that you're welcome to stay after this morning's session to talk for a little bit longer and have your questions answered. Please leave us your questions on the table so that we can use these for further discussion later. And I want to again thank Hi and Bert for this wonderful kickoff to this conversation for our campus.